Sometimes behind a gentle smile lies the darkest of minds. Today, you'll discover 5 of the most chilling cases involving female killers. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like if you enjoy true crime content, and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is there. Now then, let's dive into the cases. Elisa McNabney, she lived under 38 different identities. When the body of a prominent attorney was found sealed inside a barrel, wrapped in duct tape and filled with lime, no one could believe it. Even more shocking was the revelation that his own wife, a woman who seemed elegant, charismatic, and devout, not only had murdered him, but didn't legally exist. Behind the name Elisa McNabney hid a con artist with a lengthy criminal record and a disturbingly refined talent for manipulation. Larry McNabney was 52 when he met Elisa. A respected personal injury lawyer based in Sacramento, he enjoyed a prosperous lifestyle built on a solid reputation. He had been married multiple times before and was known for his impulsive nature and flirtatious charm. Larry relished fast cars, horseback riding, and the luxury scene. His work was demanding, but highly lucrative. He owned his own firm and resented anyone trying to control him. In the late 1990s, Larry hired a new legal assistant, a serious, efficient blonde named Elisa Riedelsberger. She came highly recommended with an impeccable resume. What Larry didn't know was that this woman had fled criminal charges in Florida and arrived in California under a false identity with a meticulously calculated plan. To enter his life, gain his trust, and take control of his finances, their attraction was immediate. Elisa was everything Larry admired, reserved, poised, and mysterious. They soon began a relationship and in 1996 got married. Larry gave her his last name and she became Elisa McNabney. But Elisa didn't just become his wife, she became his business partner. She managed accounts, reviewed cases, and gradually assumed control of the firm's finances. Larry trusted her completely. She was his partner in every sense. Meanwhile, no one in their circle suspected that Elisa was living a lie. Her real name was Lauren Renee Sims. She had been born in Florida in 1966 and by her 20s had accumulated a long list of charges: credit card fraud, identity theft, check forgery. She had been arrested multiple times and after being released on probation in 1996 simply vanished, changing her name, moving states, and starting over. During the early years of their marriage, Larry and Elisa appeared stable. They traveled frequently, attended legal events, and rode horses together. But there were warning signs that went unnoticed. Larry grew increasingly isolated, stopped keeping in touch with old friends and colleagues, and began to face financial difficulties, despite the firm's steady revenue. In late 2000, Elisa hired a new assistant, Sarah Dutra, a 21-year-old design student with no legal background. Despite this, Sarah quickly integrated into the McNabneys' world. She was attractive, outgoing, and seemingly harmless. But she soon grew close to Elisa, and that closeness turned into complicity. By September 2001, something changed. Larry vanished without a trace after attending an event in Los Angeles. He was last seen on September 10th at a horse show at the LA Equestrian Center. The following day, he stopped answering calls and emails. Clients began noticing his absence, but Elisa always had a ready excuse. Larry was traveling, unwell, or dealing with personal issues. For 5 months, no one filed a formal missing persons report. Elisa kept up the illusion. She answered phones, made payments, met with clients, and pretended everything was business as usual. She even hired a moving company to empty out the office and relocate the firm. To the few employees who remained, Elisa claimed Larry had decided to take a sabbatical. It wasn't until January 2002 when Larry's son from a previous marriage began asking questions and acquaintances noticed inconsistencies in Elisa's stories that authorities launched an investigation. A police officer visited the office, and Elisa claimed that Larry had left voluntarily, possibly gone to Florida, to start a new life. But the truth was far more sinister. It was too late. Elisa had vanished with her youngest daughter. Before disappearing, she sold Larry's BMW, withdrew funds from multiple accounts, and left behind a trail of administrative chaos. A week later, her assistant, Sarah Dutra, was summoned for questioning. Although she initially denied any involvement, her story quickly unraveled. The pressure intensified on February 5, 2002, when Larry's body was discovered inside a barrel in a San Joaquin vineyard. The barrel had been abandoned for weeks, hidden near a shed among the grapevines. It was sealed with industrial duct tape and emitted a sharp chemical odor. Inside, Larry's body was found in an advanced state of decomposition, covered with lime in a failed attempt to slow down putrefaction. He was wearing the same clothes he had worn to the horse show the last day he was seen alive. There was no doubt now, he had been murdered shortly after that public appearance. The discovery confirmed what many already feared. Elisa not only knew what had happened, she had likely orchestrated it. But by then, she was untraceable. Alongside her 16-year-old daughter, she had fled the state, once again adopting a new identity. For weeks, law enforcement tracked her across the southern U.S., following the trail of false IDs, rented cars under fake names, and eyewitness accounts describing a blonde woman traveling with a teenage girl. Meanwhile, Sarah Dutra was arrested. Under intense interrogation, she eventually confessed to key parts of the crime. According to her testimony, Elisa had planned to poison Larry with tranquilizers on September 10th. They had served him a spiked drink at a hotel following the horse tournament. Once Larry lost consciousness, they took him to a room where he remained sedated for hours, until he died. There was no struggle, no gunshot, just a motionless body that lay still throughout the night until it ceased breathing. What followed was disturbingly methodical. They wrapped the body in bedsheets, placed it in a plastic container, and hid it for several days, moving between hotels, always transporting the corpse. Eventually, they decided to conceal it inside a barrel Elisa had purchased from a hardware store. The barrel was first stored in a rented garage in Stockton and later abandoned in the vineyard. By then, the district attorney had enough evidence to issue a nationwide arrest warrant. But Elisa had already assumed yet another identity. She was now living as Shane Barony in a boarding house in Destin, Florida, working at a clothing boutique. She had sent her daughter to live with her own mother and seemed intent on vanishing without a trace. Her capture resulted from a series of missteps. A store customer grew suspicious after recognizing her face from a most wanted poster, and the shop owner confirmed her identity. On March 20, 2002, police arrested her without incident. Elisa was calm. She didn't ask why, she simply said, "I knew you'd come." In the days that followed, investigators worked to piece together her motive. Why would such a calculating woman, with years of experience in fraud, resort to murder? The most apparent answer was money. Larry had a sizable life insurance policy, and Elisa had been draining the firm's accounts for some time. But there was more: control. Larry had begun to notice irregularities in their finances, and it was only a matter of time before he uncovered her true identity. Elisa couldn't allow that to happen. She was held in the Hernando County Jail in Florida, under intensive monitoring. She had no contact with other inmates. Outwardly, she appeared calm and cooperative. She wrote letters to her daughter and her mother. But something about her behavior didn't quite add up. She was eerily calm, as if she had already made her decision. On March 31, 2002, just before her extradition to California, Elisa was found dead in her cell. She had hanged herself with a bedsheet. In a letter, she left explicit instructions for her funeral and several notes addressed to her daughter. In one of them, she wrote, "Tell her I'm sorry, but I can't face what's coming." She was 35 years old. She died without ever standing trial, without answering for the murder she had planned and executed, and without allowing the justice system to further investigate the scope of her crimes. For nearly her entire adult life, she had lived as an imposter. Elisa had changed her name at least 38 times and committed fraud in Florida, Nevada, Georgia, and California. She lied, manipulated, and impersonated her way through life. And when she finally realized she couldn't run any longer, she chose to disappear. One last time. Sarah Dutra stood trial in 2003. She pleaded not guilty but was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder. The jury concluded that, although she hadn't directly killed Larry, she had played an active role in his death and helped conceal the crime. She was sentenced to 11 years in prison and was released in 2011. The story of Elisa McNabney, or rather, Lauren Renee Sims, remains one of the most perplexing cases of criminal manipulation in U.S. history. It wasn't merely a murder. It was a lifetime built upon deception, false identities, forged documents, and an extraordinary ability to convince others she was someone who didn't exist. A legal ghost who lived undetected for decades, until she killed the one person who trusted her most. Batgirl, intelligent, dangerous, deadly, everything was spotless. Too spotless, but the smell, that unmistakable dry stench, was seeping through the closet door. Philip Inhofer had not been seen in days. He hadn't answered calls. He hadn't left his house. and his prized red Mercedes was missing from the garage. It was his daughter who contacted the police, urging them to check the home. What they found behind the bedroom door looked like a scene from a horror film. Philip was inside, his skull fractured, his body stabbed more than 30 times, and clear signs of a desperate struggle. Whoever killed him had done so with extreme rage, and then calmly had taken a shower, changed clothes, eaten something, and walked away. But this wasn't a random robbery or a fight gone wrong. The story of how Philip met his end began months earlier, with a young woman named Michelle Kumiski, known in certain circles as Jade, though the media would later dub her Batgirl. Michelle was only 19 when she met Philip. She worked as a prostitute at Mustang Ranch, a legal brothel in Nevada. She had bat tattoos on her arm, bite marks on her neck, and a demeanor that was icy and calculated. Philip, a 58-year-old retired U.S. Air Force veteran, had moved to Sacramento after leaving the military. He lived alone in a modest house in Natomas and spent most of his time in solitude. He was one of those clients who wanted more than sex. He wanted companionship, and Michelle, with little effort, knew exactly how to exploit that. From their first encounter, Philip was hooked. He bought her gifts, supported her financially. Philip had invited her to stay at his home whenever she needed. In his mind, perhaps he believed it was a genuine relationship, that the young woman cared for him, that he could protect her from the world she inhabited. But Michelle wasn't looking for affection. She wanted access, comfort, perhaps even his prized car, a 1975 convertible Mercedes that he treated like a child. As the months passed, Michelle began visiting Philip more frequently. She would shower, eat, sleep there, and take things with her. At times she used drugs. According to those who knew her, her behavior began to grow darker. She spoke of Satanism, claimed to hear voices, and described hallucinations, especially when using LSD. She wasn't just a lost young woman, she seemed like someone who had completely given up. Philip never filed a complaint or raised concern. When family members asked about her, he would simply say she was a friend he was helping. Deep down, perhaps he knew Michelle was using him, but chose to overlook it. He didn't want to be alone again, until one day he stopped answering his phone. No one had seen him in over a week. Alarmed, his daughter went to check on him. She called the police after finding the mailbox overflowing, the front door locked from the inside, and the Mercedes missing. Inside, the scene was oddly tidy. Nothing appeared out of place at first glance, until they discovered the body. Philip was found on the closet floor, covered with a blanket. Blood had soaked through the carpet. He had been dead for several days. The cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, likely inflicted by a baseball bat, followed by over 30 stab wounds, some so deep they struck bone. This wasn't a swift murder. It was a frenzied, uncontrolled execution, yet nothing indicated a forced entry. Nothing was ransacked or stolen. The killer had taken their time. In fact, forensic investigators concluded the perpetrator had lingered in the home after the murder, showered, prepared a meal, and only then left. The police noted that several items were missing: women's clothing, a few CDs, and most notably, Philip's red Mercedes. Neighborhood security cameras showed nothing unusual, except for one positioned at a nearby gas station. It captured the Mercedes and a young woman matching Michelle Kumiski's description using Philip's credit card. That was enough to issue a warrant. Authorities had no more doubts. Michelle was now the prime suspect. Simultaneously, investigators interviewed Michelle's acquaintances. The portrait they painted was deeply troubling. Michelle came from a difficult family background. She had a history of behavioral problems, drug use, and impulsive tendencies. At Mustang Ranch, where she worked, she was described as quiet but unpredictable. She called herself Jade, but reportedly liked to be referred to as Batgirl. She was obsessed with comic books, not in a playful sense but in a psychological one. She said she identified with characters who led double lives, who hid their true selves from the world. Several people claimed Michelle had mentioned wanting to make Philip disappear. Some dismissed it as exaggerated talk, others took it as a veiled threat, but no one truly believed she would go through with it. The search didn't last long. Michelle was arrested in Reno, Nevada, behind the wheel of the red Mercedes. Inside her purse, officers found Philip's documents, his credit cards, and a pocket knife stained with blood. She did not resist arrest. During interrogation, Michelle didn't appear nervous. She didn't cry. She didn't even ask why she had been detained. Her responses were disjointed, as though the situation unfolding around her felt distant or unreal. She claimed Philip had gifted her the car, that she had taken care of him, that they had been very close. When asked about the credit cards, she said he often let her use them, but she carefully avoided any direct mention of his death. The detectives knew they would not get a confession, but they no longer needed one. The evidence was overwhelming. There were no signs of forced entry at Philip's home, but Michelle's fingerprints were everywhere. Her DNA was found in the shower, in the kitchen, and on the carpet next to the body. The knife found in her possession matched the wounds. The blood-stained bat was discovered in a nearby dumpster. The clothing she wore on the day of the murder was recovered, stained with blood and tissue matching the victim. And there was something else, something found tucked inside a drawer. A drawing in Philip's bedroom. Investigators found a notebook filled with scribbles, disjointed phrases, and a cartoon, a bat holding a knife. Beneath it, someone had written, "Bad girl was here." Once news of the murder broke, the media descended on the case. A young sex worker obsessed with comic books, brutally murdering an older man with whom she had a murky relationship. It was the kind of sensational story that made headlines. The press dubbed her Bad Girl despite her tenuous connection to the fictional persona. The name stuck, and soon her image was broadcast across the country. Meanwhile, Philip's family demanded justice. His daughter in particular pushed tirelessly to ensure the legal process moved swiftly. She was devastated. Her father had simply tried to help a troubled young woman. He wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve that fate. No one did. The trial was brief. Michelle Kumiski was charged with first-degree murder, theft, and fraudulent use of credit cards. She pleaded not guilty. Her defense attempted a strategy based on her mental state. They argued Michelle had a documented history of psychological disorders, possibly untreated schizophrenia, and long-term substance abuse. They claimed the killing resulted from a psychotic break. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was unequivocal: guilty of first-degree murder. She was also found guilty of theft and unauthorized use of credit cards. Parole was not an option. Michelle Kumiski was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the reading of the sentence, she remained expressionless. No tears, no objections. She simply lowered her head. Philip Inhofer's family, seated in the courtroom, received the decision with a mixture of sorrow and relief. His daughter, visibly shaken, said, "Nothing will bring my father back, but at least we know the person who took his life won't walk free." Following the trial, Michelle was transferred to the California Institution for Women. In the years that followed, she gave no interviews and expressed no public remorse. Internal prison reports noted she remained largely isolated, interacting minimally with other inmates and spending most of her time drawing. Occasionally, she left her illustrations in the prison library: bats, shadowed cityscapes, masked female figures. More than 2 decades later, little remains beyond court records and the quiet memory of a death that should never have happened. And while the headlines no longer speak of Bad Girl, the name endures, filed in a prison archive under the name of an inmate who left her mark in a scene of horror that never should have existed. Sararat Rangsawathapurn. She paid her debts with cyanide. Imagine that the person offering you comfort hands you an herbal supplement, only for you to collapse and die moments later. It wasn't an accident. It was a lethal plan. This is the story of Sararat Rangsawathapurn, a woman who turned spiritual rituals and personal relationships into deadly traps, all for money. There were no high-speed chases, no visible weapons, no screams, only trust, kindness, a smile. That's how Sararat operated, soft-spoken and unassuming. She earned the nickname the Cyanide Lady not because of what she appeared to be, but because of what she concealed, and what she concealed was deadly. Not once, not twice, but at least 14 people died under nearly identical circumstances. They trusted her. They met her to talk, to pray, to share meals, or to finalize a business deal. And within minutes they collapsed, while she stood nearby, unmoved, unspeaking, and seemingly unsurprised. One of the last victims was Siriporn Kanwang. The two had known each other for years. On that day, they participated in a Buddhist ceremony together, releasing fish into a river, a symbolic act of goodwill and fortune. Siriporn suspected nothing. They drove together in Sararat's car. The mood was relaxed, peaceful. Everything felt normal. After the ritual, they shared food, water, and some herbal capsules that Sararat offered as natural supplements. Within minutes, Siriporn began convulsing and collapsed. Bystanders rushed to help. But Sararat didn't move. She didn't call for help. She simply watched. When the police arrived and requested an autopsy, the results were both shocking and undeniable. Siriporn had high concentrations of cyanide in her system, a substance difficult to obtain, especially in quantities that kill within minutes. It didn't look like suicide. There was no note, no motive, but something was missing. Siriporn's purse, her phone, and her cash. As investigators looked deeper into Sararat, they uncovered not only traces of cyanide in her car, on the seats, the console, and even the ashtray, but a pattern darker than they could have imagined. Between 2020 and 2023, Her bank records revealed multi-million baht deposits, often made by individuals who were later found dead, many of them within days or weeks of transferring her money. Some were friends, others were former lovers, even family members, people who trusted her enough to meet for coffee, to meditate, to lend her money, people who didn't live long enough to tell their stories. Authorities connected at least 14 suspicious deaths across multiple provinces in Thailand. In every case, one detail remained constant. Sararat was with the victim shortly before their collapse. Often the meetings were private spiritual retreats, one-on-one visits or casual meals. Sometimes the victims died in public. Others perished at home, but always, the final shared moment involved drinks or capsules provided by Sararat. One of the earliest known cases dates back to 2015. A woman named Mondatip died suddenly after spending time with her friend Sararat. At the time, her death was attributed to natural causes. There was no autopsy, no suspicion. Just another young woman gone too soon, that pattern repeated. Again and again. The only difference now, the bodies were piling up and someone had begun to connect the dots. One of those dots was her ex-boyfriend Sutisak Funkwan, who died after attending a religious retreat. Another was a police officer she had once worked with. Another still, a pregnant woman she allegedly borrowed money from. Even her ex-husband, a high-ranking police officer, was implicated in helping her conceal evidence, including items stolen from her victims. The list of names kept growing, and so did the evidence. Inside Sararat's home, police found bottles of cyanide, loan documents, belongings from her victims, and unexplainable bank transfers totaling over 95 million baht. This wasn't just a killer, it was someone who lived off murder, someone who had turned trust into a weapon. Her method was silent, no violence, no force, just seconds of distraction and a poisoned capsule. Some victims didn't even ingest them. One man reported a bitter taste and immediately vomited. That reflex saved his life. In April 2023, Bangkok police finally arrested Sararat at the time she was pregnant. Just days later, she suffered a miscarriage due to stress-related complications. During interrogation, she denied everything. But the trail of victims, the money, the poison, and the forensic evidence were too overwhelming to ignore. Her gaze, investigators said, was cold, emotionless, without remorse. Her ex-husband was arrested but later released on bail. Sararat's attorney was also charged for allegedly helping conceal evidence. What began as a puzzling, isolated case would soon unravel into one of Thailand's most chilling criminal scandals in recent memory. Authorities knew an autopsy wouldn't be enough. From the beginning, investigators knew they couldn't rely solely on autopsies. As they examined Sararat's background, they began to reconstruct a map of death. One of the first names to resurface was Mondatip Cowan, a woman who had died in 2015 shortly after spending time with Sararat. At the time, no one suspected foul play. Her death was classified as sudden, with no apparent cause. There was no investigation. Only years later did her family recall key details. Sararat had been with her, and they had argued over an outstanding debt. This would become the first documented case. But it was far from the only one. Another victim was Kitazak Kechacharon, a young man with whom Sararat had been romantically involved. He too died suddenly after meeting with her. His death, like the others, was inexplicable. No one could understand what had happened. The pattern was subtle. Each case involved a sudden, untraceable collapse with no visible signs of violence, making them difficult to question at first. Then there was the case of Rutikarn Kankachik, a police officer who had worked alongside Sararat. She died after drinking a beverage Sararat offered during a casual visit. Just days earlier, the two had discussed a loan. Rutikarn had lent her a significant amount of money. Her body was later found at home. Yet another unexplained death in a growing sequence. In Kanchanaburi province, another woman named Pachari collapsed and died shortly after attending a religious event with Sararat. CCTV footage showed the two women together. Sararat had insisted on accompanying her to the ceremony. Minutes after, Pachari collapsed in the street and was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. Her purse and phone had vanished. In Udon Thani, Sararat had approached a young woman named Anang, who had lent her a large sum of money for an alleged investment. Anang was later found dead in her bedroom. Among her belongings, investigators discovered a bottle of opened capsules, identical to those Sararat had offered to other victims. Lab tests confirmed they contained traces of cyanide. The pattern was unmistakable. Victims had all shared food, drink, or supplements provided by Sararat. Most had either lent her money or participated in financial transactions with her. All trusted her. All died suddenly and under seemingly natural conditions. One of the few survivors recounted feeling dizzy after drinking a beverage offered by Sararat. Alone and uneasy, she instinctively forced herself to vomit. That act likely saved her life. When she later saw the news about Siriporn's death, she contacted the police. Her testimony became a key piece in understanding Sararat's method of operation. In total, Thai police formally linked at least 14 deaths to Sararat, but the true number could be higher. Some victims were never properly investigated because their deaths raised no suspicions at the time. No one imagined that a soft-spoken, well-mannered spiritual woman could be poisoning her friends with cyanide. She didn't fit the profile. That was precisely why she remained undetected for so long. What disturbed authorities most was the pattern in her banking records. After every death, there was a transaction. A deposit, a withdrawal, a money transfer. Sararat didn't kill out of anger or revenge. She killed for profit. Each victim had a monetary value. Each death was a debt paid, in blood. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the victims weren't random. Sararat chose them with care. She targeted people from her immediate social circle, those who trusted her or were going through vulnerable periods, people seeking loans, people wanting to invest, people facing personal crises. She presented herself as a compassionate spiritual figure, someone attuned to Buddhist rituals and capable of offering comfort during difficult times. That's when she struck. In one of the most chilling cases, Sararat convinced a friend to meet her in a public park. She spoke about releasing karma, closing cycles, and letting go of the past. As they chatted, she handed her friend a drink. The woman began to feel unwell almost immediately, lost consciousness, and collapsed. Witnesses said Sararat didn't try to help. She simply stepped away, speaking on the phone, pretending not to know her at all. The pattern repeated itself again. And once again, the deaths were scattered across at least 8 different provinces of Thailand: Nakhon Pathom, Ratchaburi, Mukdahan, Samut Songkhram, Bangkok, and others. What hindered authorities for years in connecting the cases was precisely this geographic dispersion in each province. The deaths were investigated as isolated incidents. In many cases, families did not request autopsies, trusting that the cause had been a sudden collapse, cardiac arrest, or inexplicable medical complication. Only after cyanide was discovered in the body of Siriporn, and investigators began cross-referencing phone records, security footage, financial transactions, and statements from family members, did the puzzle begin to fit together. Sararat appeared repeatedly in the final moments before each death. She was always the last person to see the victims alive, always present, and always gone shortly thereafter. Police then focused on reconstructing Sararat's financial history. Between 2020 and 2023, over 95 million baht had passed through her accounts, an amount grossly inconsistent with any form of legitimate employment. She held no steady job, no registered business, and declared no lawful income, yet records showed evidence of gambling, illegal betting, and debts she herself had accumulated. Some investigators believe that Sararat murdered the people who lent her money simply because she never intended to repay them. Cyanide, to her, was a way to erase the debt. It was later confirmed that she purchased cyanide directly through suppliers with industrial licenses. Bottles were transported in her car, some poorly sealed or already opened. At the time of her arrest in April 2023, vials were found hidden in her home. Investigators also learned that she sometimes wore gloves and handled the capsules with tweezers to avoid leaving fingerprints. She was meticulous, but not flawless. Her mistake was underestimating how many people would come forward after the final murder. Sararat's arrest drew widespread attention from Thai media. Images showed her with her face covered, handcuffed, escorted by police into the station. Her expression was completely blank. She offered no apology, no explanation, only denial. She was pregnant at the time, sparking mixed reactions on social media. Some urged compassion due to her condition, while others believed it was a ploy to delay the legal process. Soon after her arrest, Sararat suffered a medical complication while in custody and lost the baby. She underwent further medical evaluations and remained under constant observation for several weeks. Nonetheless, the trial moved forward. Prosecutors presented a compelling case: 14 confirmed victims, toxicological evidence, surviving witnesses, CCTV footage, financial transfers, and cyanide traces found in her car, her belongings, and even containers in her kitchen. Her defense argued that there was no direct evidence she had administered the poison, but the pattern was undeniable. The coincidences defied explanation. Every death resulted in a financial gain. Every victim had consumed a capsule, and every capsule contained the same lethal substance. The trial became a national sensation. Families of the victims filled the courtroom. Some broke down during the testimonies, others simply sought answers, but Sararat remained silent, cold, expressionless. When asked if she had anything to say to the victims' families, she responded with a single sentence, "I had nothing to do with it." As the investigation continued, more names surfaced. Some were not new cases, but rather poorly documented ones. One was a woman identified only as Orn, a close friend of Sararat who died shortly after lending her a large sum of money. No investigation was ever opened. Her family recalled that Sararat had been the last person to see her alive. After her death, they tried to contact Sararat, but received no response. The body had been cremated without an autopsy. When Sararat's crimes became public, the family demanded the case be reopened, but it was too late. No physical evidence remained. Another case involved a pregnant woman whose name was never disclosed. The police learned of her death through financial records showing a transfer to Sararat just days before she died. The stated purpose of the transaction was a supposed joint business venture. She too died after sharing a meal with Sararat. She was in her third trimester, a double homicide with no justice. The woman was in the final trimester of her pregnancy, making her death a clear case of double homicide. Yet, as in many other instances, the body was cremated before any suspicion arose, erasing the possibility of forensic evidence, though not the weight of the story. One of the most serious attempts at a cover-up came from Sararat's ex-husband, a high-ranking police officer. Although they were legally separated, they remained in contact. Investigators believe he helped her dispose of the victim's belongings, conceal incriminating documents, and may have even assisted in acquiring cyanide. He was briefly detained but released on bail, sparking public outrage and harsh criticism of the justice system. Many questioned whether Sararat's influence and connections had shielded her from arrest for years. Further investigations revealed that one of her attorneys had also aided in concealing evidence, including stolen possessions. She too was arrested and charged. Sararat's defense attempted to frame the case as a conspiracy, suggesting that the deaths were coincidental medical episodes. But the evidence was overwhelming. When the trial finally began, the courtroom was packed. Relatives of the victims, journalists, lawyers, and law enforcement officials all gathered to witness the proceedings against a woman who, until the very end, denied any responsibility. Sararat remained impassive throughout. She shed no tears, showed no emotion, and listened to the victims' families as if their testimonies were about someone else. The trial lasted several months, during which the prosecution presented more than 100 pieces of evidence, traces of cyanide, toxicology reports, surveillance footage, photographs, bank records, messages, and survivor testimonies. One woman described how she narrowly escaped death after taking a herbal supplement that Sararat had given her, surviving only because she spat it out upon tasting a metallic flavor. Her testimony was pivotal, revealing clear premeditation and method. The verdict was unanimous: guilty. The court found Sararat responsible for 13 premeditated murders, 1 attempted murder, and numerous counts of fraud, theft, and illegal possession of toxic chemicals. The sentence was unequivocal: death. Though the death penalty is rarely enforced in Thailand, the ruling carried significant symbolic weight. The court declared that Sararat had irreparably violated the sanctity of human trust, and that her crimes were not impulsive but cold, calculated, and driven by greed. The social repercussions were immediate. The case ignited widespread indignation, fear, and horror, not merely because of the number of victims, but because of the intimate, everyday manner in which the murders were carried out. She killed with a smile. In response, the Thai government announced regulatory reforms to better control access to hazardous substances such as cyanide. Several provinces also launched initiatives to revisit previously unexplained deaths. Sararat did not ask for clemency. She showed no remorse. Today, she remains incarcerated in a high-security prison in Thailand, held in complete isolation, while the families of her victims continue to struggle with the chilling question: how could someone so close be the cause of so many silent deaths? Thus ends the harrowing story of Sararat Rangsawathapurn. Sonia Rios, the most dangerous black widow. 2 men, 2 husbands, 2 trips to the Philippines, and both returned in coffins. Authorities took years to piece the puzzle together. But behind each death lay the same woman, the same narrative, and the same chilling motive. This is the story of Sonia Rios. Sonia Rios lived a quiet life in Lomita, California. She maintained a low profile, worked as a nurse, and was a mother. To the outside world, she appeared to lead an ordinary life, but her romantic history was marked by a deeply disturbing coincidence. Both of her husbands were murdered under mysterious circumstances while visiting the Philippines, one in 1987, the other nearly 2 decades later. The first victim was Earl Bordeaux, a retired U.S. Army sergeant. After marrying Sonia, the couple traveled to the Philippines in 1987 for a family vacation. Shortly after their arrival, Earl was shot to death while sitting inside a car. The crime occurred in an urban area with no clear signs of robbery. No witnesses came forward, and the murder remained unsolved. Sonia returned to the U.S. alone, carrying Earl's ashes, claiming they had been victims of a random act of violence. At the time, police had no reason to doubt her story. However, suspicions began to mount when it was revealed that Sonia received a substantial financial payout following Earl's death, including life insurance and military survivor benefits. She resumed her life in Lomita, seemingly moving on. Nearly 20 years later, in 1996, she met Larry Riskin, a Navy veteran known for his reserved demeanor and aversion to conflict. The couple married in 2001 and appeared to have a stable relationship. In 2006, Larry told his family he was planning a trip to the Philippines to settle business matters related to his late father. Sonia notably did not accompany him. Days after arriving in Manila, Larry was shot in the head at point-blank range while dining at a restaurant in Olongapo City. The assailant fled and was never identified. Once again, Sonia became a widow on foreign soil. This time, however, red flags emerged. Larry's family couldn't understand why he had traveled alone. Even more unsettling, Larry had recently revised his will, leaving everything to Sonia. She had also taken out an additional life insurance policy on him shortly before his departure. As investigators delved deeper, a familiar pattern surfaced. Both husbands had been murdered by gunfire. Both were killed in the Philippines. Both had life insurance policies naming Sonia as the sole beneficiary. The similarities were too stark to ignore. Although it wasn't yet enough to warrant an arrest, the FBI took over the case in 2007, following pressure from Larry Riskin's relatives. What they uncovered was alarming. Sonia had been in contact with individuals in the Philippines days before Larry's murder. Authorities suspected she had ties to local organized crime. A deleted email retrieved from her computer referenced Larry's trip with an ominous phrase, "It will all be done before he returns." The FBI began building a case, but they faced significant obstacles. The murders had occurred overseas in a country with a vastly different legal system and limited cooperation. There were no living witnesses, no direct confessions, only an undeniable pattern. The geographical distance made investigation nearly impossible. In both cases, Philippine police reports were vague and incomplete. But what disturbed agents most was Sonia's behavior following the deaths. In both instances, Sonia remained emotionally detached. She showed no apparent grief. After Larry's murder, she did not travel to the Philippines to retrieve his body. Instead, she coordinated the arrangements from California and showed little interest in pursuing justice or identifying his killer. When questioned by the FBI, Sonia was evasive. She offered only minimal responses, claiming Larry had chosen to travel alone and that she knew nothing more. Yet she was the sole beneficiary of his life insurance, and no other motive for the murder existed. The agents then began tracing her financial activities and found that shortly before Larry's death, Sonia had increased the value of his insurance policy, a move that perfectly aligned with a disturbing pattern. Following the date of the trip, Sonia had also made several unusual deposits into her bank account shortly after her husband's death. When investigators attempted to trace the origin of the funds, they uncovered fragmented transfers from Philippine banks with no clear justification. The implication was obvious. Sonia had allegedly financed the execution and subsequently collected the financial benefits. During interviews, the FBI noticed Sonia repeating phrases strikingly similar to those she had used 2 decades earlier after the death of Earl Bordeaux, as if reciting from a rehearsed script. She claimed both tragedies were unfortunate twists of fate and insisted she had simply been unlucky in love. Communications between Sonia and individuals in the Philippines were vague and sporadic. No witnesses came forward, and no one directly implicated her. As months passed, the case grew increasingly frustrating. Back in Lomita, California, Sonia continued with her life unimpeded. Some neighbors remained unaware of her past. Others began to grow suspicious. Yet officially, Sonia remained a free woman. until everything changed. On the night of April 8, 2007, Sonia Rios was shot in the head inside her own home. There were no signs of forced entry or theft. It was a cold, calculated execution. Just 9 days earlier, someone had attempted to kill her at her beauty salon in a drive-by shooting. She survived the first attempt and claimed she had no idea who might want to harm her. But the police began to suspect a deeper motive. Her murder stunned everyone. The FBI, still actively investigating her potential involvement in the deaths of Earl and Larry, now saw their chief suspect become a victim herself. The homicide investigation moved swiftly. The Los Angeles Police Department identified the perpetrators: 22-year-old Eric de la Cruz, Sonia's great-nephew, and his friend Jonathan Aramburo, a U.S. Marine. The two had conspired to kill her and claim her inheritance. Sonia had reportedly promised them money, but according to their testimony, later reneged. That betrayal ignited their motive: greed. They procured a weapon, conducted surveillance, and first attempted to kill her on March 30th at the salon, but failed. Their second attempt on April 8th succeeded. They executed her inside her home and fled by car, only to be arrested shortly after. During the 2011 trial, the prosecution presented text messages, call records, and statements confirming the conspiracy. Both men were sentenced to 26 years to life in prison. The FBI closed its case on Sonia Rios following her death. She was never formally charged with the murders of her husbands, yet for the investigators, the pattern was far too deliberate to ignore. Though the justice system never held her accountable for those earlier deaths, fate ultimately caught up with her. Thus ended the story of the so-called Black Widow of Lomita. 2 husbands murdered, a fortune collected, and a violent death at the hands of her own blood. A case that left more questions than answers, and a legacy of suspicion that lingers to this day. Elaine Parent, the world's most wanted woman. No one truly knew who she was, but everyone knew what she did. She stole identities, changed faces, and killed when necessary. Thus began the global manhunt for Elaine Parent, the Chameleon Killer. It all started in 1990 in Florida. Beverly McGowan, a 34-year-old professional woman driven and independent, was planning to share her apartment. She placed an ad seeking a roommate. That's when a woman calling herself Alice entered the picture. She seemed kind, well-spoken, and cultured. Claiming to be British, she spoke with a polished accent and introduced herself as a numerologist. She had an uncanny ability to charm without arousing suspicion. Before long, Beverly trusted her. Alice requested personal information under the pretense of conducting a numerological profile: birth date, social security number, even banking details. Beverly complied. A few days later, she vanished. Her family, unable to contact her, reported her missing. But police found no immediate leads until July 21st, when a worker discovered a torso dumped near a canal in St. Lucie County. The body had been decapitated, with hands removed and visible tattoos seemingly erased. At first, identification seemed impossible, but a partially faded rose tattoo on the right ankle became the key detail. Beverly had that exact tattoo. Forensic evidence, including dental records and the victim's clothing, eventually confirmed her identity. Her car was later found nearby. Inside were blood traces, forged documents, and a fingerprint that did not belong to Beverly. But Alice had already vanished. No official records matched that name. What investigators didn't yet realize was that they were hunting a master of disguise, a woman who would change identities the moment she sensed danger. Her real name was believed to be Elaine Antoinette Parent, born in the Bronx, New York, although even that was uncertain. No official birth certificate was ever located. Her personal history seemed to start and stop abruptly across different states. After Beverly's murder, Elaine disappeared completely. Years passed, and her presence surfaced only occasionally. Credit card activity under false names, passports featuring her face but unfamiliar surnames, altered documents. Elaine had at least 12 active identities. Sometimes she posed as a teacher, other times a medical assistant or a corporate sales executive. She could switch accents, styles, hairstyles, even apparent age, with ease. They dubbed her the Chameleon Killer, not only for her disguises but for her sharp intellect and her uncanny ability to evade capture. She impersonated real women, extracted their personal details, and forged documents. And according to some investigators, she may have killed more than once to assume a new identity. Yet only one murder, Beverly's, was ever confirmed. In one chilling moment, Elaine mailed a self-portrait to the police, accompanied by a note that read, "Best wishes, your chameleon." It was a taunt, A psychological game. She knew they were hunting her. She also knew they couldn't touch her. The FBI placed her on its most wanted list. America's Most Wanted aired entire episodes about her. But Elaine always remained one step ahead. Over more than a decade, she was reportedly seen in London, Paris, Cape Town, Sydney, and across various U.S. states. Surveillance cameras occasionally caught glimpses. A figure in a wig, oversized glasses, but never enough to make an arrest. In 1998, the case re-emerged when a new clue surfaced. Elaine had been using the identity of Sylvia Ann Hodkinson, a woman missing since 1990. She used her name, social security number, and investigators feared Sylvia, too, had been murdered. But once again, there was no body, no confirmation, just a pattern. And Elaine continued to live, hidden in plain sight. Elaine Parent, the woman of 1,000 faces. By April 2002, after more than a decade on the run, Elaine Parent's luck began to unravel. Police in Panama City, Florida, received a concrete tip. A woman named Darling Thompson, living alone in a modest apartment, bore a striking resemblance to one of the age-progressed images the FBI had circulated of Elaine. This woman, who spoke with a British accent and claimed to be a real estate agent, had begun to arouse suspicion due to her erratic behavior and the conspicuous absence of any verifiable past. Detectives initiated discreet surveillance. Once they were confident of her identity, they obtained an arrest warrant and approached her residence. Elaine greeted them calmly and requested a few minutes to change clothes in the bathroom. The officers, accustomed to nervous fugitives, momentarily let their guard down. Moments later, a gunshot rang out. Elaine Parent had shot herself in the chest with a .357 Magnum. She left no note, no confession. She died before she could be interrogated, before facing trial, and most crucially, without ever revealing her true identity. She was 59 years old, and had spent at least the last 12 years living under stolen names, forged documents, and secrets that would never be fully uncovered. Inside the apartment where she ended her life, police discovered wigs, makeup, counterfeit credentials, notebooks filled with various signatures, and photographs showing her in a multitude of guises. It was as though she had become a collection of invented characters, each crafted to extend her freedom a little longer. Elaine's death officially closed the Beverly McGowan case, but it left the most haunting questions unanswered. Were there other victims? What truly happened to Sylvia Ann Kinson? How had she managed to sustain so many identities for so long without detection? One prevailing theory is that Elaine didn't act alone. Some investigators believe she had accomplices, individuals who helped her fabricate documents or conceal crimes. Others argue that her greatest weapon was her charisma. She preyed on the vulnerable, earned their trust, extracted their personal information, and then vanished without a trace. Her case left a lasting impression on the FBI and other intelligence agencies. Elaine Parent became a cautionary example of how a single individual could evade capture for years by outmaneuvering conventional identification systems. She thrived as a fugitive in a pre-DNA, pre-social media era, yet her story continues to be examined today by criminologists and identity fraud experts. The documentary hunt for the Chameleon Killer reignited public interest, revealing that Elaine had at least 20 confirmed aliases and had been spotted in 5 different countries. Still, her origin story remains unknown. No one truly knows what trauma or motivation led her to become the woman of 1,000 faces. Her ending did not come in the form of justice served in a courtroom. It came with a solitary gunshot behind a closed door, far from the spotlight. The Chameleon Killer died as she lived, concealing the truth, and perhaps the most unsettling part of her story is that we still don't know if Parent was even her real name.